Yes, we're ready. Okay, I guess I'll start this meeting. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this morning, and I'll start off by turning it over to our president, our chapter president, President Latrice Millhouse.
Well, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to take a moment and just say thank you for joining us this morning for our Black History Month program. Epsilon Psi Iota Phi Lambda Sorority Incorporated. We're located here, as you all know, in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Although we have ties all the way back to 1929, where our organization was founded by our founder, Lola Mercedes Parker, in 1929. We want to take a moment and just recognize the history of Black Americans. And today we are very fortunate to have a descendant of Frederick Douglass, Mr. Douglass Greene, with us this afternoon or this morning. And we just wanted to say thank you for joining us and for just spending a portion of your day with us. We're excited to have you all. Black History Month is one of our cornerstone projects of our sorority. So we take a lot of pride in it, and we understand how important it is to just take a moment to reflect on the history of many, many that have come before us. And again, we're so fortunate to have Mr. Douglass Greene with us this morning and this afternoon, depending on where you are. So thank you to this chapter. Thank you to our Black History Month committee, their chair, Sorotina Clark. Thank you to our technology committee for setting this up. Thank you to SOARs that are joining us from all over. And again, thank you to our speaker and our chapter for joining in this morning. But I will turn it over to, I believe, it's Sora Polakalik for our prayer.
Thank you, Madam President. Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for the opportunity to come today on this special occasion, God, as we celebrate those that have come before us. God, we ask you that you bless this event, bless the speaker, bless my sisterhood today, God, as we come forth to learn a word of wisdom and knowledge. We just celebrate this, not just Black History, God, but we celebrate you for allowing us to be here to witness this, God. Lord, we ask you to bless each and every one of us, God, as we continue to live and do your will in our sorority, God. We ask you to bless those that aren't able to be here, God, and that this goes forth and the vision of what the Black History team is looking for that is presented today. We just thank you for what is about to happen right now in the name of Jesus, God. We ask you to bless those who are in the need of healing right now in the name of Jesus. Whatever my sisters and our guests are in the need of, God, we know that you're going to supply triple fold, God. We ask you to keep everyone safe, God. We ask you to just open our eyes, open our ears to listen, to receive what is about to be heard today in the name of Jesus, God, not just to hear it, but to do it in your will, God. God, we love you. We bless you. And once again, we thank you for this opportunity to be here, to live, to see another history being happening today. It is in Jesus' name, God, that we pray. We bless the committee that's put this together, God. And we're so grateful, God, that we have this appointment time in your name. We just ask you to bless it. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Sora. And at this time, I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker. And on behalf of Epsilon Psi Black History Committee, I would like to thank you all also for joining us for this presentation. This morning, I have the honor of introducing a former coworker of mine, Mr. Kevin Douglass Greene. I had the honor of meeting Kevin when I first started working for the Veterans Administration in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Kevin, like his great-great-grandfather, has dedicated much of his life serving others. He was born in Paris, France, and raised in Seaside, California. And after serving in the Army, Kevin retired and moved to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He completed a degree at Middle Tennessee State University, and he is the recipient of the Army's Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Award. And along with members of his family, he continues to fight for freedom for us today, like his great-great-grandfather. And without further ado, I introduce to you our guest speaker today, Mr. Kevin Greene. Kevin?
Good morning, good afternoon, Afternoon to everyone. I'd like to say what an honor and privilege it is to be able to have this conversation with everyone today. I'm very, very proud of our organizations, especially our organizations of color, our organizations of women, to be able to provide this opportunity across, basically across the United States and across the world. So my introduction, thank you, Tina, for that, and having been a coworker, thank you for remembering me, reaching out and asking me to participate. Another thing, you mentioned that I am from Seaside, California. I'm very, very proud of that. So I just had to restate that, that Seaside will always be my home, even though I've been here in Tennessee for the last 18 years. So I still work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, raising my family, and actually have my two grandsons here at the house this weekend, while my daughter and son-in-law, they flew off to Florida for the weekend. So we're happy to do that. So what I'd like to do with this conversation is, it's entitled The Douglass Tree. So it's very important to me that I not only tell the story of Frederick Douglass, but I like and I enjoy providing that link to my direct lineage, even though there are other branches of the Douglass tree. I enjoy, presenting mine. So that's what I'm going to do right now. But as first up, I will work in Frederick Douglass. The points about Frederick Douglass, which strike me as very important. Now, his whole story, of course, is very important, but there's particular stories within his books that I like to focus on, and that's what I'm going to do today. Of course, he was born enslaved in Maryland on the Eastern Shore, where he spent quite a bit of his time as a youth. Now, in early part of his youth, he was sent to Baltimore, Maryland, to live with another part of his enslaved family, of his slave family. And there, the wife of the home thought, she was considered a northerner. So education to her didn't have any interest when it came to young people learning how to read and write. So along with her own child, she started teaching Frederick Douglass how to read and write. And her husband, being of what we consider Southern breed, when he found out about this, he said he forbid her to teach him, because to teach a slave how to read and write would forever ruin them, because they would then know that there was more than to just being a slave. So I think that was a real good base foundation of why Frederick Douglass decided to be, to dive into the realm of education and self-education, in his what he had to do. And so from there, he would obtain books and deal with other young people to strive on to learn how to read and write. I mean, that's a story of its own, and with the time, that's that just throw that base out there of how important learning how to read and write is, and how much you all know and I know, and we've seen it in our own lives and maybe in our own experiences, of how we often take that for granted. Whether it's in the formal education, when I say formal education isn't necessarily just institutionalized education, but also education within the home. So that's very important. The second one I like to point out in Douglass's life is where he first found his freedom. Now, I realize he escaped as an adult, but he first found his freedom as a slave while he was enslaved. He was hired out to work with Mr. Covey, the Negro breaker, as his title was. And that was to take a slave that was considered unmanageable and make him manageable, and to break his will to where the slave had no other purpose but to do the bidding of the master. So within his time with Mr. Covey, Douglass reached a point to where Mr. Covey, treated him so bad that he escaped. He left, went to his master's plantation. They told him he needed to go back because that's where he's supposed to be. He went back. Mr. Covey, he knew that Douglass knew something was going to happen eventually, and Covey snuck on him. They baked up on him. Basically, they had this big fight, and Frederick Douglass overcame Mr. Covey, and he had a decision to make. And this is what's very, very important: is we have decisions to make when we're in a position of kind of a position of authority. Douglass at that point was in the position of authority, even though he was the enslaved. He had the opportunity to decide whether Mr. Covey lived or died. And within that decision, he also had to decide if he killed Mr. Covey, what would what did he have to deal with after that? He would have to, he would definitely have to leave the possibility of being captured, and of course, the possibility of dying. And then his second part of that is he decided to let Mr. Covey live. So what is Mr. Covey going to do after that? As it turns out, Mr. Covey no longer treated Frederick Douglass the way he did after that. And so that's where Douglass found his freedom, that no longer, how long I'll be a slave. In fact, that in my mind and spirit, I will always be a free man. So that decision right there is what freed him up. Now, he also had found God and Jesus Christ prior to that too. So of course, I know that had a profound, in his decision on what he did. So now I'm moving forward. Now, with Frederick Douglass, I always like at this point, I'd like to point out, we can talk about Frederick Douglass all day. But one thing I always like to is that Frederick Douglass's story is so unique that it's not like that he's the only enslaved African American, enslaved Black man or woman that wrote the books, but he wrote it 3 times. And so I always encourage people to read the autobiographies of Frederick Douglass by going through the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. That's his first one. The My Bondage, My Freedom is the second one, and Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, because you see a progression in his maturity and his knowledge. He goes back to the beginning, starts over in his writing, but he sees, and like many of us as adults, what we saw our environment as 10 years old, our environment at 20 years old. We look back at what 10 years old was. Now that I'm 61, and I look back at my environment when I was 10 years old, I have a different perspective of where, what, why, and we did things. And that's what Frederick Douglass did in his books. So now when Frederick Douglass escaped, he was in his mid-20s, and he was able to escape. So a lot of times when I work with kids, I say, any knowledge, what do you think it looked like to escape? And they talk about dogs and horses, and you think about, especially when I came to the South and I'm driving, when we drive down to Alabama, I'm like, boy, it's easy to get lost up in these woods and everything. So even though Frederick Douglass was in Maryland, there was still, to escape still had its challenges. So for him, he did not have that same experience as a lot of slaves like Harriet Tubman, who was from the same area as Frederick Douglass growing up, when she was doing, had people on the Underground Railroad doing the type of escape. His was different. He, based on what he was able to learn and his knowledge of reading and writing, he was able to get on boats and trains and wear a sailor's uniform, have the right type of paperwork, and basically walk to freedom. Now, on the other end of that is that to be able to do all that, he had Anna Murray on his side. And, it's a whole nother story that we are bringing out on a wide scale now, is talking about his wife, Anna Murray Douglass, because she deserves it, twice as much credit for Frederick Douglass's escape as just his knowledge alone didn't do it. It was her support and her ability as a free woman at that time to be able to provide him that support and to stand by his side when he did escape, and to risk what she had to join him in the unknown going forward. So my great-great-grandmother, Anna Murray Douglass, is one of those unsung heroines in history that we are bringing more to light about her, and rightfully so. And so as we move forward with the Douglass tree, I'd like to go now and, with Anna, Douglass did a lot of moving around. There were times he had to leave and go to Europe, especially with the incident with John Brown. He was basically, for his safety, he was forced to leave the country through Canada and go across to England and the Ireland, to to Great Britain's over there, and spend a lot of time there while his wife Anna was at home taking care of the children and stuff. So as military, former military, we can appreciate what men and women have to do on the home front when their spouses go away on deployments and things like that. And that was basically a similar case for Frederick Douglass. But just imagine, because I always think about what it was like for World War I and World War II, and when military people didn't have Skype and cell phones where they can talk to their loved ones every day, and they're waiting for letters to come across the ocean to be able to hear from them. And so that was the same case with Frederick Douglass in that case with Anna Murray. So they had 5 children: Rosetta, Charles, Frederick, Louis, and Annie. And Annie died at a young age. But Rosetta, the only living girl of the family, Rosetta grew up to be a teacher, and she was a founding member of the National Association of Colored Women. And they lived, her and her husband, the family stayed in the Rochester, New York area, where Frederick Douglass and his family spent a lot of time prior to him moving to Washington, D.C. Frederick Douglass Jr., he was an abolitionist also, and with the Civil War, where Frederick Douglass and Frederick Douglass Jr. were both recruiters within the Civil War. So they, when the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect, and just a side note for those who didn't know, the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect at the same time that the Battle of Stones River here in Murfreesboro was heavily engaged. So that battle was going on at the same time that the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. So for local history, just think about that, how important the win of that battle helped to galvanize the Emancipation Proclamation. Even though Black troops did not participate in that particular battle here locally, it was still a very important battle within the Western theater in the Civil War. And so, like I said, that was one of the things that made me proud to be a recruiter in the Army, was knowing that Frederick Douglass and Frederick Jr. were both recruiters during the Civil War. Now we move on to Louis and Charles Douglass. These are the other sons. They actually did participate in the Civil War. and they originally joined up in the 54th Massachusetts, the famed 54th, which the movie Glory. So they were, part of that unit. Charles, he eventually moved over to a cab unit, and he also got sick and did not spend as much time as Lewis did. But Lewis became a sergeant major within the unit, which is a very, very high and proud position in the non-commissioned officers corps. So I'm very, very proud of their participation and my being able to follow in their footsteps as a member of the United States Army. Now, Charles, who was actually my great grandfather, so I'm going up in my line now, in my direct line. Very important, thing that which still is relevant today is that Charles Douglass founded a community in the Annapolis, Maryland area called Highland Beach. And roughly around 1910, I think it was, is when he because of exclusion is why this resort came to be. He went to the beach down there, and he was not allowed on the beach that the white people had. So there was some property nearby, beachfront property, and he had the pockets to do it, and he bought the property and created, this community, and was able to divide it up and sell lots to other African Americans. And today there are many of some of the families that originally bought property there still own some of their property, and it's still, like I said, it's still a community today called Highland Beach, Maryland. Frederick Douglass had a summer home built there, and it's there today, and it is a museum that most people through appointment can visit the home and go inside, but he never had the opportunity to live in it. He died before it was completed. So after Charles created the community, and then moving on to my grandfather, Hallie Douglass, he became the mayor of Highland Beach for a very, very long time. So now I'm going to back up into Haley here. My grandfather, he was born in New York, but this is, there's another proud, I was working on that military connection. Now I'm going to go into this education connection. He was educated at Phillips Exeter Prep School, but actually he did his undergraduate in Harvard University. So he's a Harvard grad in the early 1900s. And from there, he went to Washington, D.C. and was an educator at Dunbar High School, Washington, D.C. for over 40 years. He taught Charles Drew. He taught Tennessee. I knew I had that name in I kept saying it. Let me get it right. The Chief Justice A.A. Birch, that the Justice Building is named after in Nashville, the court building. My grandfather taught him in high school. And so within the Washington, D.C. area, between Highland Beach and Washington, D.C., my grandfather was well known. The Douglass family, of course, was well known in Northeast Washington, D.C., or Northwest. And then Douglass home was in Southeast Washington, D.C. So that's, like I said, very, very proud of the things that my grandfather did. So moving forward is now my uncle, Joseph Douglass. Now, Joseph, he is a Fisk graduate. So he did his undergrad at Fisk. So he came all the way out from Washington, D.C. And he was actually in school with John Hope Franklin. And he is a fraternity brother of, he's an alpha with John Hope Franklin at Fisk. I met John Hope Franklin one time, shortly before he passed away, and he remembered, he was telling me, I remember your grandfather coming out to visit, and to have those connections is very, very humbling. That to have someone like a historian say that I knew your grandfather, I knew your uncle, and I knew them as just as people, not as historical figures in time. But my Uncle Joe also graduated from Fisk and did his graduate work at Harvard University. So there was two generations that went to Harvard University. Eventually he was the dean of students at Bennett's Teacher College. He was a Fulbright lecturer in Egypt and worked for the Department of Health Education, welfare, high levels in that before he passed away. So very, very, very proud of my Uncle Joe. And of course, there's my mother, G Douglass Greene. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C. She was a Washingtonian down Northwest. Like I said, she grew up as a Douglass. And so her whole life, she was known as a Douglass. And one of the stories that she told me, so I don't have a whole lot of stories, but this one I think I always hold on to. We were at an event looking at this, this sheet. The front of the sheet had pictures of all these African American men. The backside had the answers. So you're supposed to write down the name of these men. So she's filling it out. And then she says, I can't get these two. I remember their faces, but I can't remember their names. The reason why I remember the faces is they used to come over the house and visit my father a lot. Well, it was and there I go to this. I blame it on being 61, but it was the y'all might be able to help me because I should have wrote this one down, but I thought I wouldn't forget. Well, one was Carter G. Woodson, who also at one time taught at Dunbar High School and was a Harvard graduate. And the other was actually the organizer of the March on Washington. And his name will come back to me in the middle of it. But those two used to come to the house, and that's how my mother remembered them. And so my mother, it's interesting. I wasn't raised in Washington, D.C. like my mother. When she left Washington, D.C., she married my father. I was in the military. Like I said, I was born in France, and then I grew up in California. So I didn't grow up under what I would say Douglass mystique like she did. Everyone knew she was a Douglass where she was. She went to Bennett College. She went to Morgan State also. So when she got to California, and this is kind of like, it's interesting the way that I raised my kids, and I've seen when I saw my cousins and with myself, as I grew up being Kevin Greene before I grew up being Kevin Douglass. So I had the opportunity just to grow up and be a young man and learn like everyone else. And then after time is where I determined, at an early age, I found out about being a Douglass, but and kind of what it meant wasn't until I was probably a teenager where I kind of grasped actually who Frederick Douglass was and why and the things that he did. But it was later on in life where I decided, now it's time for me to take the torch and move forward and start doing things to promote the legacy of Frederick Douglass. And that's kind of like what I do with my kids. They know who he is. They've gone to presentations with me. They have all this information here. And when and if they decide that being part of promoting that legacy is for them, then that's what they'll do. But it's not something that I push on them, and it's not something that my mother pushed on me. It's just that I knew about it. So I just said, my decision to go forward is what part of it is sitting here talking with you all today. So how does the Frederick Douglass legacy continue? Well, one, it's, of course, with myself telling the stories like this, but also we have what's called Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives. So the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives is an organization that was founded by my cousins, Kenneth Morris and Nettie Washington Douglass. And they are actually descendants of Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, where their mother, Nettie's mother and father met down in Tuskegee, Tuskegee. That's how they met on campus there. But this organization, I mean, it's very important that, we all realize that slavery and trafficking existed long before, the slave trades to the Americas. It existed all over the world even prior to that. But, the sad thing about it is that it still exists today. After all the striving that Frederick Douglass did and all the other people to stop these type of things, they still exist. So that's why this organization is still going forward. And also within that, we have what's called the Million Abolitionist Project. So this particular book I mentioned earlier is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. So this book, we've had a campaign over since 2018, which was the 200th anniversary of Frederick Douglass's birth, to where we give these books out to young people all over the world. Actually, they just shipped a shipment to Ireland. I've given recently Mr. Ricky Turner of Turner's Transportation here in Murfreesboro. They sponsored a case of books and gave books to the Murfreesboro City School Libraries. So the books are available to young people. So the books, we never charge a young person for these books. We always have organizations and people that sponsor these books so they can get them out to young people. So that's very important. Another thing we do is for that legacy, it's called Frederick Douglass on the Hill. So in Eastern Maryland, in Talbot County and all that in the on the Eastern Shore is where the Bailey family is. And Frederick Douglass originally was Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey is his original name. And so all the Baileys that's still there, Terrence Bailey, one of the descendants, has he spearheads the organization, Frederick Douglass on the Hill, and we recently had a mural unveiled there of Frederick Douglass and the Anna Murray Douglass and all the descendants. And myself, I was in the mural, and so it's a very, very nice mural. But that getting the community there to not only accept and recognize and realize who Frederick Douglass was, but to get other people, to just get that word out, to be able to come and see and make the other people within the community, for those who don't realize or don't embrace the legacy of Frederick Douglass, to try to get the whole community to do that. And so just with myself, I'm doing this presentation here, not this coming week, but the week after. I will be in Philadelphia and Delaware, Wilmington, doing some presentations and giving out books there. And I work with the organization Hands Across Philadelphia over the last about 3 years. Very, very, community-based organization working with me and with getting books out to kids. So we've got hundreds of books out to kids in Philadelphia just based on their support and working with me. And so that's pretty much where the family exists. I have a daughter that's a graduate from MTSU. I have a son that is in his sophomore year at MTSU. A couple other of my children decided to just go the way of the workforce. We homeschooled all our children, and they're still very productive and very smart, productive young people. regardless of which way they choose to go. Like one of my daughters, she's in fashion design, and the other one, she does art. She works at an art studio in Nashville, doing framing and everything, and they really love that. So at the time, college wasn't for them, but they still knew and have the background to continue that when they choose. So I'm very proud of my family legacy in the past and my legacy going forward. And I appreciate everything. And so, now, this conversation really turns into a conversation now. So that's why I'm talking to you guys as me. I just don't like to be like telling people stuff. I like realizing that, hey, we're all people too, and you can ask me any questions you want. And if I'm not going to answer it, I'll tell you. So,
Okay, at this time, okay, we'll turn it over to our mediator, Dr. Catherine Brown. So if anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom chat, or you can put your question in the comment section, and Dr. Brown will call on you or read your question. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sora Clark. And Mr. Greene, let us first just give you a virtual round of applause for sharing your story, because if the narrative must be shared, it must be shared by us. And you have shed light on this and the need for not only Black history, but the contributions of your family. So thank you again. And greetings to our sorors, dignitaries, men of Iota, future Iota leaders, and guests. Again, I'm Dr. Catherine Y. Brown, and I will be serving as your moderator. I see a question is already with a hand raised, so we're going to go to Carolyn Cox. You can unmute and ask your question at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I know that Frederick Douglass actually started out as a Republican. He advocated for women's rights and things of that nature. And at one point, he even ran for a vice presidency candidate under the Equal Rights Party ticket back in 1872. So if Mr. Douglass was alive today, which party affiliation do you think he would be associated with? And how do you think he feels about the changes that have actually occurred over time with where we are? What do you think his biggest advocate would be in regards to what's happening within the world, within the United States today?
Back to, let's see. As far as party-wise, what makes sense party? When you get down to it, a lot of stuff just don't make sense on either side. So it's really hard, because over time, different parties evolved, and the Whigs and all the different things, Republicans, Democrats, they evolved into other parties and things. So to say what party he would affiliate with now, really hard to say, because you see people with common sense, people with no common sense moving parties for reasons that they choose to do so. So I couldn't say, because I know right now that there are Republicans, especially within the Freedom America push or whatever that is, that uses Frederick Douglass's name as a Republican, even though we don't necessarily see the same. But so what would he think overall? Well, because we get this, I kind of focus on my cousin also, Kenneth Morris, who does a lot more talking than I do, and we never can really answer this question because one, we just go based on his teachings and his speeches and everything. He would, of course, be, proud of progress, but I think he would still promote agitation, agitate. As much as Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, oh man,
Well, I tell you, listen,
the other people that they're just, there's no way of saying that anyone would be satisfied with where we're at now. And it's not only, it's not satisfied on either side. We as people of color have things that we need to still continue doing, and people of non-color still need to have things that they need to continue doing. Both sides on that. So that's kind of like my answer. That's one of the hardest ones for me to answer.
it's a tough one. And then guess what? You have another "What would Frederick Douglass do?" question. So here we go. So what would Frederick Douglass think of, and how might he combat the current education literacy issues within the community today? And that is from Drew Jenkins in the chat.
Well, with the literacy piece today is really a dynamic that that a lot of people just weren't ready for, as much as technologically advanced as we thought we were. When we went, especially when we went into COVID and all the ITs and companies and everything and the school districts had to start relying on what they thought was very excellent IT infrastructure. Really wasn't, and it wasn't their fault because their infrastructure was good for what they were dealing with. But now, I just say, because people ask us about it, and I say, well, we've been homeschooling though, so we were good. Even though my son did attend public school, he graduated from Oakland High School, so he had that combination of both. But he would see that the advancement, especially advancements of STEM and being able to see, because one thing I look at, which is important to me when I look at the different schools, and you got it's nice to see that schools, like I guess Central Middle, probably half the graduating class are valedictorians, and that's just based on that they are able to achieve the grade point averages and the requirements to do that, which is outstanding. And I always look to see what the people of color at these different schools that are in that valedictorian and salutatorian, to see how well they've done. Doesn't mean that they didn't do well in education, didn't learn anything, but it's still a challenge, and I think it always has the base, the foundation of education always starts at home. Teachers can only do so much. A lot of teachers do more than they should, as much as they can. And a lot, this is just, you ask the question. It's kind of like me talking for Douglass, is that as a lot of times as parents, I know it's a challenge, and sometimes I've seen things where that people go to the schools and say, you're not doing what I'm paying you for. So the question is, so what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Douglass would kind of maybe think, because he's seen where, he knew that education was important, and within that home, that white lady thought education was important. On the other hand, there were, the system said, no, slaves, not important for them, because that's how important education is. And Douglass caught on that very early. So
Absolutely. So I'm going to jump. I got some hands raised. I got some questions in the chat, and we got some questions that came in beforehand. So let me go to the one that came in before. Then I see you, Sora Clark, and then I'm going back to the chat. So it says, Frederick Douglass has been quoted as saying, knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. And he also said, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. What is his favorite quote that you think should be shared with the world?
Well, what I do in this book, when I give it to children, when I have time, I put in here, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men/women. We've updated that to modern times for the young ladies. That's like that the education quote was from the him being taught, that it's, to read and write, that education would destroy a slave. But beyond measure, there's, I think that is my favorite quote, but there are also times, within, say, for instance, like the Black Lives Movement, everything like that, the agitate is very important too. But within realms of responsibility, agitation is within a realm of responsibility, not just wild abandonment of doing things. It takes a lot of thought. So.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to Tina Clark.
Thank you. Kevin, my question is for you. How does it feel for you as a descendant of Frederick Douglass to know that your great-great-grandfather is still being taught, to children today, and his name is on, buildings, schools are named after him? How does that make you feel?
Proud. Sometimes it's just the vision, trying to, say, for instance, if I'm sitting there looking at this wall in this room right now in front of me, I try to just spread everything, I was like, wow, that's it can be overwhelming. So I have to bring it back into a perspective of the screen where I can see. It's one of the latest achievements of Frederick Douglass' name is the Frederick Douglass International Airport in Rochester, New York. And I flew in there in when did I go? December. And they did an unveiling of a mural in Rochester, in that airport also. And it's like, wow, there's statues all over Rochester, New York. The airport, there's, just Ireland, you'd be surprised how much admiration and the monument, the markers and stuff. I haven't been to Ireland, but my cousin told me that in Ireland, some people know more about Frederick Douglass in Ireland than some Black students do in Black schools. And hey, but no, it's very proud, and it's just more than I can really. If I try to think all of it, my head will explode. So that's why one of the things I do is, you remember working with me. There are plenty of people at TVHS York that don't know who I am. They know me as Mr. Greene, but they don't know, and that's just the way I am. I'm Kevin Greene, and then when being Douglass fits in a conversation or something, then that's when it comes out. But other than that, I am who I am.
Absolutely. Thank you. So another question from the chat. What are your personal goals for the legacy of Frederick Douglass? And does his hometown celebrate him similar to the way that Atlanta does for Dr. and Mrs. Coretta Scott King?
Okay. Well, when you say his hometown, it's kind of like different than dealing with Dr. King. But I would consider his adopted hometown is technically Rochester, New York. And Rochester, New York is expanding their love and celebration of Frederick Douglass. There are people that have celebrated Frederick Douglass for many, many, many years. There's Dr. Helen Pitts, before she, and the committee still exists today, but the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives has moved their headquarters to Rochester, New York now. So we're looking at creating an interpretive center there for Frederick Douglass, so people can come into a building and learn things there. So, Rochester, New York is going to be, like Frederick Douglass Central eventually. But, reaching out, just like, Dr. King, just having those different things in different places to remember him. Because, there's, one of the things I believe, and I might be lying, but I don't remember, even though, Dr. King's statue is a whole lot bigger than Frederick Douglass is in Washington, D.C. I think Frederick Douglass has more statues than Dr. King. So, but I might be lying, so I'm just saying, I don't know. Biased on this one, but.
Okay. All right. So we have about 6 minutes left. So I'm gonna go to one person who has their hand raised. I'll go back to the chat. And one person had multiple questions. I just want you to know I do see the question, but I see a hand raised from Drew. If you'd like to unmute.
Drew, you got up and trying to walk away on us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Drew,
yeah.
see you talking.
I'm sorry, I'm here. Yeah, my question is, this might be a question you might not want to answer. One of those you said, if you choose not to answer it, you won't. What is your personal belief of Dr. Umar's claims that he is a relation to Frederick Douglass, and what do you think of the school that he is attempting to start?
See, you knew I wasn't going to answer. You knew which question I asked that I wasn't going to answer. As far as, creating an institution of education, I could never step on anybody's goal to educate folks in America. Now, his claim as far as being a descendant of Frederick Douglass, I let my cousin Nettie and her lawyers work with that one, and I stay out of it.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you, Drew. All right, the next question is from the chat box. Why did Frederick Douglass's wife and children not travel to England with him? And what changed that allowed him to return home without the threat for the reason he left?
I'm trying to put timeline on this. So I believe at that time when, having the children that he had and his wife was the issue with John Brown. It was kind of like an escape. He was associates with John Brown. John Brown talked to him about doing the raid on Harper's Ferry. Frederick Douglass didn't think it was a good idea. Neither did Harriet Tubman. And once that happened, his name, was in the circles. People knew that he was associated with John Brown. So he, like I said, head up through Canada, which in Rochester isn't far away. It's, right there on the lake. But I believe that's what made him go and not taking the family. You just imagine now, what does it take for you to take all your family overseas? It's just not a simple task. And I believe that was the case. And in that being, I believe that he felt that his family would be still safe here, that it was him that they were more worried about and not necessarily the family. So.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go to our last question. Let me tell you, I could stay here with you all day.
So could I. I'm just saying, I got nothing else.
Okay, we got time. So this last question, I want you to kind of, answer it, but also just to summarize, right, in your closing remarks. It says, why is there a need for Black history? And specifically, why is there a need for the history of Frederick Douglass to be told?
Okay, so that the need for Black history that's, so I would say it's always been an issue. If it wasn't, if it was included in the historical diaspora of America in the first place, I think it would still be something that would be needed, just based on for people to still see themselves as individuals. To see, we, as much as we're Americans, we're still Black Americans. And Black history didn't start when the first slave hit the shores of South America and North America. And that's the difference between Black history and African American history. African American history started at a certain time frame. Black history started way, way back. And so to include that within American history, I think it's very important to realize that it's much bigger than this 200 and some years of what we consider, America. So I think the second half of that was, can't remember for sure.
So why do you think the history of Frederick Douglass needs to be told?
Just based on the build, what he was able to start at, end up, and the things he achieved in between, and how he did it. I mean, he was, you look at the 1800s and 19th century. I think probably if Abraham Lincoln had lived longer, he probably might have been the most photographed person in that century. But Frederick Douglass was, and he knew how to use that medium once it became available. And just the things that he was able to accomplish, his knowledge, how to deal with people. He just didn't sit, so knowing what he did and how he did it, I think is very important. Not just that, Frederick Douglass was a former slave, it's breaking down, and you see people do a lot of different books on Frederick Douglass because you're able to find documentation and different things from other instances within Douglass to make his picture more full. And that's why people write other books about his politics, his religion, because they find, correspondence, documentation on him through other things that he did that didn't come from his particular words. So people were able, I think, learn a whole lot by learning Frederick Douglass in depth, not just the surface of him. So I think that I tell people, go in depth on him. Just once you get started, just go for it.
Thank you so much for being here today. In closing, I just want to say it's often said that a people without a history or a knowledge of their history is like a tree that is planted without roots. And you have reminded us today that we have roots and we have a legacy that's as strong as trees, which live for a long time. And that story needs to be told. And for that, we say thank you for sharing your time, your heart, your talent, and your passion. If there are any of our future Iota leaders on today, will you please let Ms. Tina know in inbox, because I want to personally get you the book that Mr. Greene talked about, because that narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, they all need that copy. You have reminded me of that today. So thank you again.
Can I put a disclaimer on that, which I appreciate so much? Now, we can work on getting you guys books. Okay. Particular special edition.
Oh,
but
okay.
It is specifically for young people. So if you're getting it for one of your young people, your sons, daughters, grandchildren, that's what the focus is on these books. So.
Well, look, you know what? This is what I say. That's why alignment is there, because when you said it earlier, it was on my heart to get it. But guess what? Now they get the special edition and they're going to learn something. So thank you for sharing that. At this time, I will turn it back over to our chair, Ms. Tina Clark. Friends, sorors, guests, everyone, can we please give a virtual round of applause, and let's give some comments in the chat box for Mr. Kevin Douglass Greene. You are absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, we appreciate you.
Makes my heart smile.
Thank
Thank-
you, Sorrel, Catherine. Thank you again, Kevin. A fun fact, when Kevin was talking about himself, I was kind of smiling to myself because he and I used to work together. My position was different from his, but I worked in the same building as his, and he was responsible for bringing me on board because he works HR. And a funny thing about Kevin is Kevin never drove a car. He always rode his bike. He,
Oh,
do you still ride your bike everywhere, Kevin?
Well, I work from home now, so I don't have to do it. But no, yeah, bike or bus is how I got to work. Yeah.
Right. So, but I like to say on behalf of the Epsilon Psi Black History Month Committee, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for sharing your story. Again, like I said, like Kevin said, you would never know. I don't even remember how the conversation came up about his descendant, Frederick Douglass, but I was extremely happy. But when I had the opportunity to do this, Kevin is the first person I thought of. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, guests. Thank you, everybody that took the time today for joining us for this presentation. It means a lot. Like Dr. Brown, I was thinking about we need to get a copy of those books for the fields for Epsilon Psi's fields. So, and you mentioned children and grandchildren. So, Kevin, I look forward to that because I have 3 grandchildren that I too would like to share the book, and I wanted
Ooh, never
personally.
know it.
We need them signed by you too, okay?
Yeah, that worked
So,
on it.
Good point.
Okay, so again, thank you everybody for joining us. And I think I saw something in the chat about staying on for a picture. Do we want to do that now with all the guests on or just the sorority?